Well, good evening, everyone. What a wonderful group we have gathered tonight. I'm really excited for what's in store, and I'm going to be very quick. But I do want to welcome those who are in the room and also those who are watching via YouTube from all around the country. We know that there are family and friends and fans and supporters who are cheering on our students, both in this room and around the country. For those I don't know, my name is Stephanie Kurtzman, and it's my honor to serve as the Executive Director of the Gephardt Institute for Civic and Community Engagement, which sponsors the Civic Scholars Program. And I just want to say a few words about the Gephardt Institute and about the Civic Scholars Program to provide some context for what we're doing tonight. So very briefly, what we do at the Gephardt Institute is we foster student learning, participation, and impact in civic life. And the ideal outcome of these efforts is that we have fostered civic leaders who are equipped with the knowledge, the skills, the experience, and the lifelong commitment to leave positive change in the civic environment. And we know how important that is, particularly these days. And that we know we need to have passionate and skilled young leaders like our civic scholars. So what is the Civic Scholars Program? In essence, this is one of our flagship programs, and to date, we've prepared 151 students and alumni for future civic leadership. Among us, we have half of our 16 seniors presenting tonight. The other half presented last night. They are spending collectively as this group of 16 2 years together, combining academic learning, civic learning, dialogue, listening, and experiential learning together as they prepare as civic leaders. And one of the hallmarks of the Civic Scholars Program is the Civic Summer, and you'll hear about that tonight. What I'll do now is pass to one of our wonderful co-instructors, another Stephanie, who will tell you more about the Civic Summer and about the student presentations that we're honored to hear tonight. Thank you all for joining us.
Thanks, Stephanie. I don't know what it is about a microphone that makes me so much more nervous than just talking. So let me just take a deep breath. Okay, so my name is Stephanie Weisskopf. I am one of the co-instructors of the class of 2023 Civic Scholars, along with Dwayne T. James back there, who you'll hear from later. And it has been one of the greatest privileges of my career here at WashU. As Stephanie alluded to, Civic Scholars is a 2-year program that accompanies 6 academic credits. So our seniors are almost at the end of their 5th credit. But tonight's presentation really wraps up the meaning-making portion of their civic summer. So their junior year was spent in class in the fall, just kind of making a mess of concepts of civic and community engagement. Examining definitions, re-examining, reconstructing, and learning about different functional areas that some might define civic and community engagement. And then spring semester of junior year, we really ask Civic Scholars to be grant writers. All semester, their assignments culminate in what ends up being about a 16 to 20 page grant proposal for what they will embark as their civic summer. It's totally driven by their own passion area, their own civic interest, and they spend all semester approaching that summer experience with ethics and integrity and the pillars of what we hope makes a healthy relationship within community. So at the 16 seniors that we have, 8 went last night, and I know the program would suggest you would see 8 tonight, but Maurice is out with a really horrible cough, and so he will not be joining us, so we have 7 of the remaining seniors here tonight sharing with you about their summer. Some interesting things, given that we have 151 Civic Scholars, the legacy of Civic Scholars. Of these 16, 14 chose to spend their summer in St. Louis. Which is pretty atypical given the history of the Civic Scholars program. I attribute that to this group, their first 2 years largely being on Zoom and really heavily impacted by the pandemic, and demonstrated a sincere interest in investing in their community, of which they had planned on their college career being about. So 14 were here. 1 went to Chicago, which we heard from last night, and 1 went to DC, who we'll hear from tonight. And their civic interests really vary. Our most common kind of intersection was education, but even then, how each person approached their impact within education looks so different, and I think that's the beauty of the Civic Scholars program. They really get to define what their passions are, what they want their impact on the world around them to be, and you'll get to hear a little bit more about that tonight through our PechaKucha. Fun fact last night, which I'm really embarrassed to learn, it's PechaKucha. Anyone know that? Why didn't you tell me? Well, so I'm gonna change my script from last night to tonight to be PechaKucha. So thank you for joining us for that, which really is meant to represent a more conversation or chit-chat style of presenting. So our Civic Scholars were asked to complete 500 hours of direct impact in a community that they felt passionate about. So wrapping that experience up in a 5-minute presentation in 15 slides that advance every 20 seconds is quite a challenge. So I'm really excited to hear what they have to share, and at the end of 4 scholars, we'll invite them back up for you to ask questions, because likely all of your questions will not be answered in their presentation. So we will have 4 present, invite them back up for questions, and then we will go on to our final 3 for the evening. Before we go on, I just wanted to say thank you all so much for being here. I consider this room a room of cheerleaders and champions of our Civic Scholars, so if you consider yourselves one of those, could you raise your hand? I know we got some parents in the room. Yes, okay, amazing. And I also know we have some folks who are interested in pursuing the Civic Scholars program, so I think this is hopefully a good teaser into what your experience might be in pursuing that program. I would be remiss to have one announcement before we go on. I know. So we have two birthdays in the room. I swear it wasn't intentional when we planned the semester that they would both be tonight. But Diamond and Ruchika's birthday are both tonight, so not a great birthday present. So again, my forever apology. I would be mortified if people sang me a song, so I will not ask the room to do that, but you know Dwayne would have, so remember that. Yeah, so a celebratory night in many ways, birthday and presentation. And thank you again to those who are joining via YouTube. I also know some of our donors are joining in that capacity. So in tonight's program, you'll notice that our scholars all have sponsors who have made the stipend possible for these scholars. So a big thank you to the Stern family, the Seiden family, the Kleinhandler family, and Dr. Olson and Dr. Marcus. So thank you so much for making this experience possible. And I think I covered all my talking points, even with a microphone. So up first, we have one of the birthday stars themselves, Diamond Warren Tucker, who is a Stern Family Civic Scholar from Coral Springs, Florida. She's majoring in dance in the College of Arts and Sciences, and her project focused on increasing access to resources of maternity care for Black women in North St. Louis. Diamond had the opportunity to work with Black Power Blueprint and Common Sense Childbirth Institute to receive her doula certification and mentorship. So with that, let's welcome up Diamond.
I don't know. Okay, so Black women are 3 to 5 times more likely to die to pregnancy-related complications. The maternity mortality rate for Black women in 2019 was 20.8 per 1,000 deaths. And even though the United States is a country that spends the most on healthcare out of the country, it ranks 33 out of 36 for mortality rate. And so my question for this project was what systems were at work, particularly, and why things were going that way. And in my research, I found, as we're surprised but not really surprised, racism. So one of the policies and things that I've been working on with other doulas in St. Louis and just been going over is the Menimbus Act of 2021. This is an act that is built on existing legislation, 12 bills that has very much so to do with getting Black women the resources that they need, improving mental health resources for pregnant women and things of that nature. I met most of my cohort and the organizations that I worked with this summer at the Black Power Blueprints Farmers Market. It happens every Saturday, 10 to 2, so I spent most of my Saturdays volunteering with them and getting to know the coordinators and members of the North City community. And out of that came the African Doula Project, which is it turned out to be a free thing to train 14 Black doulas in North City, St. Louis. I am one of the 14th. Consisted of 14 modules, 3 live trainings, and then there's also a 6-month mentorship that I'm currently in the process of doing. And just for a little background in terms of what is a doula, we provide physical and emotional support for mothers and birthing families, as well as comfort and relaxation measures. And secondly, the other organization that I worked with and got my certification and getting my certification through is Common Sense Childbirth, the JJ Way. It is a patient-centered, patient-led maternity care system that focuses on supporting the mom and the baby and the family throughout perinatal and pregnancy and postpartum. There are 4 tenets. One of them being access. This is really about getting mothers and birthing families the access to the resources and the knowledge that they need in terms of getting connected to the right providers and things of that nature. Second in that tenet is connection. So this is really about, in my studies and in my research, we found that a lot of women of color, especially Black women, they are very scared about getting connected to their children because they don't really have hope of them surviving or their baby surviving. And so it's really important to really get on that connection aspect, which then leads to knowledge. That is one of our 3rd tenets, and it's really about keeping the patient informed, especially in the current healthcare system now. Doctors just shoot you with a lot of jargon and you don't really know what's going on. And so this is really about breaking down the language and the medical knowledge for pregnant women and birthing families in that process. And last but not least, through that all, that should empower the client. It's very important in the JJ Way and in my own practice that clients and patients are able to make their own decisions and they're empowered with the knowledge that they have. I'm just here to answer questions and support them emotionally and physically. This is really their journey, which goes back to the patient center. And now I'm currently in a mentorship with Black Empowered Doula. It is a doula organization in Florida. I've been working with her for about 2 months, and she's helping me figure out how to get my business off the ground, connecting with clients, networking with other doulas in St. Louis and just across the nation. And yeah, most of my doula network consists of my cohort that I went through my training with, as well as Black doulas in St. Louis, specifically those that serve North City. And so we have a lot of coffee chats. There were a lot of coffee chats earlier in the summer, and I still meet with some of them, and we talk and we have our conversations and things of that nature. And this design that you've been seeing throughout the slides, that is the design for my doula business that I started this year. Really, again, it's just about keeping the patient-centered, client-centered. I'm really focusing on how to incorporate movement in pregnancy and postpartum from others. So that's a really big tenet with my company, and still working. I currently have a client, 6-month-old pregnant mama, baby boy. So we have like 3 months until the baby is here, but yeah.
Awesome, thanks, Diamond. That smile you saw at the end, I could hear through the phone this summer when all the pieces came together. So I just know Diamond's doing exactly what she's meant to be doing right now. So next up we have Racquel Ding, who is a Stern Family Civic Scholar from Vancouver, Canada. She's in the 3-2 Masters of Social Work program and majored in anthropology. Her project focused on collaborating with the Office of International Students and Scholars to better support academic and social transitions into higher education in the United States by creating a pilot orientation program called the First Year Experience. So with that, is Rachel?
So for my civic summer, I worked at the Office of International Students and Scholars to develop a pilot program called the First Year Experience, which expanded orientation events into the school year and really went beyond the 2-day orientation programming. So I embarked on this project because international students like myself face additional cultural and legal barriers when living and studying in the United States, and such barriers unfortunately were exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic as countries introduced lockdowns and travel restrictions, which left students stranded and without any social emotional support. So given that students faced barriers and a lack of support, I knew that the 2-day orientation program was not enough. Thus, I came up with the idea of the First Year Experience, which expanded programming for international students throughout the school year with monthly informational and social events pertaining to student life and student engagement. Planning this program over the summer, I initially had a timeline for how exactly I wanted the year to run. I had lists and lists of events, but I wanted to inundate students with as much knowledge and as much information sessions as possible. I wanted everything to be perfect. However, planning this program over the summer was actually really supposed to be a collaborative effort between the Office of International Students and I was part of a team, right? I was able to bounce ideas off of Azane and other OISS staff about what the program would really look like now that we had 200 new international students, which is one of the highest. I also had to think about incorporating an equity framework, right? So I had to ask, what was lacking in the current 2-day move-in orientation? What do students need? And really understand that international students face additional hurdles more so than domestic students and needed additional programming throughout the school year as we were coming out of a pandemic. With this framework in mind, I've surveyed new international students because I wanted to plan events that catered to the students' needs, right? So students wanted to actually see events related to social bonding, studying in the United States, community engagement, safety, and also career planning. And I distributed this survey in the summer. In the planning process, I was also able to finalize events. So OISS and I were able to meet with community partners such as WUPD, Gephardt, and the Learning Center, and we were able to plan a kickoff this September, which allowed students to reflect on their first few weeks of school, and students wrote letters to their future selves. One moment in the planning process I actually wanted to highlight. So our first information session was with the Learning Center 2 months ago to talk about study skills, time management, and classroom culture. I planned this event during midterm season, really thinking that this would be a space for students to debrief and also learn new time management skills. But nobody showed up to the event. We waited for an hour and a half. So what do? What really happened exactly? I felt frustrated in the moment as there was a lot that went into the preparation process, such as meetings and preparing materials and researching best practices for international students. So I felt like that was a moment where I had to learn and had to adapt. So some of the lessons I learned included the fact that, well, it was during midterms, so it was obviously very difficult for students to show up because students might be studying or they have a midterm during when the event was run. And it turns out that simply in our marketing approach, we just sent emails asking students to click a link and sign up. And we realized that we had to do a new approach to have mandatory signups on Eventbrite. So for our most recent Thanksgiving event at South Grand and the International Institute, we had a mandatory sign-up of 25 slots. All 25 slots, I believe, were filled and everybody showed up. So looking ahead into this program, I hope this program continues into the school year, and we'll continue to have monthly events such as a career panel and a winter decorating event. And I will be conducting an end of the semester survey just to be able to assess any strengths and areas of improvement for the first year experience. With regards to the long-term vision, I hope that the program will continue on during each school year and becomes a source of community and support for new international students. I'm also thinking about how after I graduate from my master's in social work, how I will be best able to support the students or potentially have this program planning become a practicum or an internship. Generally, I think this project has helped me develop both civically and professionally. I was able to engage in a lot of active listening, open dialogue, and most importantly, I had to be adaptive to different situations at hand. I am ultimately really grateful for OISS and Ezine Erzor as my community partner, and I look forward to continuing this work. Thank you.
Up next, we have Sarah Narcisse, who's a Stern Family Civic Scholar from Long Island, New York, is in the Masters of Public Health candidate at WashU's Brown School and majoring in urban studies. Their project focused on unpacking intergenerational trauma through therapeutic mentorship, formation of support networks, and education of community members on transgenerational trauma.
Summer in DC can be very fun, but it can also be filled with a lot of grief and sadness. In DC, neighborhood beef can cause happy memories to turn sour, causing a cycle of violence, death, and revenge. For my civic summer, I knew I wanted to impact health disparities that impact Black communities. I was looking for an organization that works to increase accessibility to mental health resources and social services for Black communities, and I found In the Streets, an organization that works to combat intergenerational trauma in the Black community. What is intergenerational trauma? All of our experiences have an impact on us. Trauma shapes our thoughts, our feelings, and how we parent. This trauma can be passed down to one's children and create a bunch of negative outcomes, such as chronic illness, substance abuse, and that can disproportionately affect minority communities. In the Black community, mental health can be stigmatized. This is due to hundreds and hundreds of years of systematic racism, biases in mental health practices, and in mental health research that create underdiagnoses for Black and brown students and misdiagnoses of Black and brown adults. In the Streets works at the intersection of mental and physical health to combat this trauma. They provide free therapy, support groups, and yoga for community leaders, for community members, and one thing that made me want to join In the Streets was an integration of community members. In Civic Scholars, we talked a lot about how important it is to discuss with the community what you are doing and make sure that your impact is what the community wants and needs. This summer, I came in with 4 goals: to be an additional employee for In the Streets, to find resources that would help minority and Black communities, to learn to be to learn how to better serve Black communities, and to learn how to best network and facilitate relationships between organizations. I work to integrate myself in community, listen to how I can better serve community members, and had a bunch of conversations about what would be best for the community. I served as an additional employee and worked with grant writing and organizational activities. But mostly I built a program for DC's Summer Youth Employment Program. This program was 5 weeks long. It included 15 to 24-year-olds. And in preparation for it, it included watching a lot of Black media, an excuse to watch a bunch of TV, finding excursion sites, an excuse to go through a bunch of DC museums, a bunch of fun activities and games in preparation for icebreakers, but also having a lot of difficult and interesting conversations about what it means to be in community in DC, what the community needs, and what would be best to teach these students. Doing SYEP was not easy. Sometimes the youth weren't receptive to a lot of our lessons at first. We had to adapt and listen to their experiences. We learned that a lot of what we were saying for them, they were desensitized to. We had to really make sure that we were talking to them and listening to them. We had a lot of one-on-one conversations about what would be best. But most of all, we wanted to not just discipline them like they have experienced in school or at jobs, but also to listen to them and be there for them. One thing about community impact I learned is that it's easy to think that you aren't doing enough. I had to learn how to adapt and know that impact looks different depending on the community and the goal. My favorite thing from this community is learning so much more about the community and what makes it special, gaining relationships that will have a lasting impact on me and my life, whether it was with community members or with organizational leaders. And I will take what I've learned from this summer into my future.
Last up for our first section of 4 is Lexie Jordon, who is a Stern Family Civic Scholar from Lincoln, Arkansas. It's a double majoring in educational studies and American culture studies and minoring in psychology and brain sciences. Lexie spent her summer supporting public charter school teacher retention and satisfaction while building an online community for educators.
Hi everybody, my name is Lexie and I used my summer to explore the civic issue of teacher support. I want to look at various levels: systemic, peer-to-peer, and individual to teacher. I also want to take a moment to say thank you to the Stern family. Your financial contribution is amazing and so helpful for students like me to accomplish projects like this. So I grew up in the small rural town of Lincoln, Arkansas, and when I was in high school I had the opportunity to get involved in a group called Student Voice. And what it was a professional development program for teachers that invited students to the table as equals to talk about school culture and how to build a positive school culture. It was this moment that really got me interested in community work and how to support schools. It also really taught me how difficult of a job being a teacher is. And it's not like that job's gotten any easier since the pandemic. According to the National Center for Educational Statistics, 50% of schools started the school year understaffed. And the biggest issue with filling those vacancies is finding the people. And so there's also all this anxiety about diminishing teacher pipelines. And what this is turning out to be is that we have a lot of under-certified and inexperienced teachers in their first years who need specialized support in order to help them grow and have these long careers. And so looking at St. Louis more specifically, students who are most likely to be in these schools that have vacancies are students of color and students from low-income households. So this summer, I found an organization called the Missouri Charter Public School Association who welcomed me with open arms, and they were already interested in this teacher support area. So they'd accepted a grant to survey every charter school teacher in the state of Missouri. And I jumped into that data analysis right away. It was overwhelming, it was crazy, and I learned so much. It was absolutely mind-blowing. Throughout my entire project, I've really tried to elevate and amplify the voices of teachers, and so it was these sorts of responses that helped me build my final guide that I made for MCPSA. So we had sections on teacher retention, teacher development, and teacher recruitment. And so at the end of the summer, I left my guide in the capable hands of MCPSA, and it's now in the process of being published as a series of white papers. Something I really kept in mind throughout this whole process was like the gravity of the situation. I was writing not only on behalf of MCPSA, but on behalf of the teachers who trusted us. And I also had to remember like who my audience was. Like I'm writing to charter school leaders all across the state of Missouri. Like that's very significant people to be writing to. But I also wanted to think about how to help teachers talk to teachers. Throughout our classroom curriculum, we've talked a lot about listening to a community and finding sports that work for them. But I couldn't really do that with MCPSA. They'd answered a survey, and now I had to work. So what I did was I created this website. This is Teacher Talk. There are three main components, a blog, a forum, resources. It's designed so that people can interact with the site in multiple different ways. You could read a blog, you could message on a discussion board, maybe find a new podcast under the recommendations. And I had 6 different guest authors on the blog over the summer. They wrote on a variety of topics, as you can see. And I was really purposeful with choosing different types of teachers. So they came from different school contexts. They had different roles within their school community. And they all also came from different states, which was really great. So I had this big, wide focus. And summertime meant that they were like naturally more reflective, thinking about the past year. But if I'm being frank, my website was the least successful part of my summer. It's really hard to build something that people want to go to and see repeatedly and return to. I do plan to keep the website up through the summer, but I'm not really sure what's next there. However, I knew that my website wasn't going to grow on its own, so I started using social media to help get people to come to my site. And I found this really great way that everyone can help teachers. So have you ever heard of like a clear the list campaign? You know? Yeah, I'm getting some head nods. Well, what I started doing was any teacher who posted their wish list to my forum, I bought something off their list. And it was great. Personally, those last few weeks of the summer where I was buying gifts for teachers were the most enriching part for me. I was able to see in real time the joy that it brought, and it was a great last-minute addition to my summer, and I am so thankful to be in the right place at the right time with this funding to be able to contribute to this. Arguably, this fundraising push was the least and most impactful part of my summer. I was able to make a real difference in the lives of the 14 teachers who I bought gifts for, but it's not like I did anything to change our broken education system. But I did help lower the stress on some teachers and buy some really fun books for kids. But what this summer really taught me is that there are a million ways to support teachers. You can work with advocacy groups to lobby the government. You can amplify the voices of the teachers in your own life. But really, whenever possible, I encourage you to support teachers directly. This summer really helped me appreciate the work that goes into running a school, running a classroom, and I'm excited to keep working in the field of education to build better support systems for students and teachers.
Okay, I know like I've literally read the 18-page reports and whatever, and I still just grin ear to ear hearing everyone talk about their impact and work this summer, because it's truly incredible. So I'm going to invite you all back up. If you can bring those lab mics with you and then pass them around there. Yeah, perfect. So handheld. And then we have about 5 or so minutes from any questions from audience members, and it could be for a specific Civic Scholar or for the collective 4. Whatever is on your mind. And then we have Danielle and myself who will walk around with a microphone so those in the room and those on YouTube can hear. So
Yeah, so this is specifically for Lexie. By the way, amazing project. I loved hearing every second of it. But so since you plan to go into education, and I guess this is somewhat generalizable to all of you guys, like how does your project sort of inform like the next steps that you'll take in that sort of journey?
Yeah, so on a personal note, so I am a double major in education, American culture studies, and I'm kind of playing around with what I want to do next. And part of the summer was me figuring out if I'm ready to be a teacher yet. And this kind of taught me, maybe not right now, maybe not quite yet, because there is so much work and it is such a demanding job. And I have immense respect for anyone who is a classroom teacher. Maybe one day, but not quite yet for me.
My question is for Diamond. Happy birthday. I wanted to ask, is there any, you think, critical information for childbearing people to know that maybe hospitals don't tell them?
Possible to not tell them?
Yeah, that hospitals leave out. Or
Yeah, there's a lot. For instance, like C-sections, they're not really necessary. The thing about the United States maternal health care system is they treat pregnancy like it's an illness as opposed to it's a natural cause in life. And in the U.S. healthcare system, the most important thing is just getting the baby out as fast as possible. And these hospitals and health providers are oftentimes following the policies of their insurance and what's stated by the hospital due to liability and whatnot. So it's very rare that the patient is the main concern. It's really just getting the baby out, and oftentimes for Black and brown women, that just doesn't really translate that well either. For instance, there's been a lot of instances this year that I've seen, and even just that's always happened. A Black woman can go into her regular primary care doctor's office 7 months pregnant, need a doctor's note for a bed rest, and the nurse and the doctor will argue with her about it. She doesn't need the rest, she's absolutely fine, and things like that. Secondly, most of what we know about pregnancy and how our maternal health care system is created, it has been through the experimentation on Black and brown bodies, and there has never really been much care there in that aspect, and a lot of that has passed down intergenerationally, which is something that was very important part of Sarah's project, and also something a part of mine. Like she said, this trauma does pass down through families, especially for Black people. So, for instance, the trauma that my mother has experienced, for instance, so my existence right now, the egg that my mom, that was in my mom's womb that made me, was also in my grandmother's womb. And so whatever trauma that my grandmother experienced and whatever fears and beliefs she had, that genetically passed down to my mother, which then when my mother had me, passed down to me, and so things like that. And so it's really important to decolonize, really important to understand where these beliefs are coming from, and just to break the system down, because there's no fixing it. It just needs to be destroyed.
Hello. I feel like there is room for undergraduate students to support in all of y'all's projects, and so I was just wondering if y'all can give a one or two type of things as far as how can undergraduate students support your projects, or just support your cause and your passions going forward, especially as you all are going to be leaving campus soon.
Okay, so in terms of the project of the Office of International Students and Scholars, since we want undergraduate students to be able to talk about their experiences, potentially undergraduate students who have had research positions or internships can speak with our international community about what it's like to work in these roles in the United States, and also something just a more future vision, having future Civic Scholars also take on this project as well, and having summer interns and orientation leaders work on this project. The Office of International Student Scholars hires orientation leaders for the summer, so that's also one way to engage with the office and this project, is orientation leaders are expected to attend at least one event per semester.
I guess for my project, I think it depends. In some way, many people can go into communities, but I think that you have to go into them with training, with thought about who you are interacting with. So I guess my advice is not necessarily to go into Black communities and try to do this work, but really to make sure to hold the ideas of intergenerational trauma and all of that in your experiences, in how you go into your whatever you are interested in, and make sure that you are preventing these biases and really trying to stop intergenerational trauma or stop the effects of it continuing and racism and all of that.
I think the best way for students to get involved is probably really similarly to how I got involved. So I volunteered at a charter school once a week last semester, and it was really, really great. You get to meet really great kids, great teachers, and like being that extra person in a kid's life can really help, helping them with tutoring skills, helping them build back. We're still dealing with backslides from the COVID-19 pandemic, and that one-on-one tutoring connection is a really important thing for students. And I think that that's probably your best and easiest route into helping the local St. Louis community.
Yeah, as far as how undergraduate students can get in, a lot of WashU students pre-med, a lot of y'all chemistry, biochemistry, all of that, a lot of y'all are in global med, things of that nature. And I think it's really important, before we talk about getting involved, it would be important for the vast majority of the WashU population to understand why they are doing the things. Because at least in my experience in the past 2 years that I've been here, WashU, the only thing that WashU's done is take away from St. Louis. And the goal of my project was to give whatever I could that I took in the process of being a student here, and as well as supporting that. And the way to support that is be knowledgeable. Y'all need to know what the hell is going on in St. Louis. Like it's about the community. You can't go to WashU and you say you're in St. Louis and you know what's going on. You're only on campus. You don't get off that. You need to know what the community meetings are happening. Like what's the policies in North City, St. Louis? What's the policies in South City, St. Louis? You know, are there any community board meetings that you can join? When you're thinking about volunteering, don't just think about volunteering at those hospitals, but what are the policies of those hospitals? What kind of medical providers do they have? What are their rates for maternal mortality rate, and how can you advocate given what your position is in the work that you do? So I think the first thing starts with knowledge and understanding the role that you play as someone that's, you know, contributing to this harm, and then just once you equip yourself with that knowledge, advocate, and be a part of the community. Like, that's really all I can say.
Well, I hear a challenge in that last comment, so thanks, Diamond. So we are going to do a little interruption in the middle, so thank you for being our first panelist. In the back of the room, we have birthday cake for Diamond and Ruchika, and everyone who's here. So if you all want to get some sweet treats, find your seat again, and then we will get started with our final 3 at 6 o'clock on the dot.
All right, everyone, let's take your seats so we can get going with the second part of the program. And the room goes silent. Oh, you don't have a mic. All right, as we're getting mic'd up and getting ready, my name is Dwayne T. James. I am one of the co-facilitators, and I will be your MC for the second part. I'll try to do as good as Stephanie did. I'll try. All right, so with that, first up is Ruchika. She is a, did I get that right? Okay, kinda. Ruchika? I'm trying. That's why I asked. And the parents are here too. Oh, wow, they're taking pictures and everything. Oh, good. All right. Kleinhender, Civic Scholar from Plymouth, Minnesota. Her project focused on increasing mental health access for unhoused populations in St. Louis, working with volunteers of Unhoused St. Louis, a local grassroots organization. She developed and conducted a training program centered around empathy-based interaction. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
How did the system fail you?
Well, at the time that I first became homeless, I was living in a small town, and I was told it would take more than 2 years to be able to see a specialist, like a psychiatrist.
Unfortunately, there are many other people out there like Jennifer who are unhoused and struggling. You know, we think about how do we fix this. The first thought is maybe we put in more mental health practitioners, more psychiatrists, more psychologists. But how do we know when is enough, and where do we even start with that? So my first thought was, what if we start from within? Here at WashU, we have a peer counseling organization known as Uncle Joe's. Don't ask me who Uncle Joe is, we have no idea. But I've been grateful to be a part of this organization since my freshman year. So I've had the opportunities to see mental health here on campus pre-COVID, during COVID, and now in this weird post-COVID era. Uncle Joe's operates as a 24/7 phone line as well as an in-person office every night from 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. Students utilize our service for kind of a whole range of things, so it can be difficulty adjusting to campus all the way up to sexual assault and, unfortunately, at rising rates, suicidality. Now, to clarify, Uncle Joe's is a completely peer-run and organized organization. So we are really just peers supporting peers. And in my opinion, I think that's what makes us really unique, and that's why we're so heavily utilized here on campus. If I've learned anything from my time with this organization, it's that taking the time to listen to people and make them feel heard can be really incredibly meaningful. I also want to emphasize that we are not a replacement for professionals in any way. There are plenty of other resources here on campus that do that job, but we are really just here to kind of close that gap. As I started thinking about some of the most marginalized people in our society, people like Jennifer, I thought about what it would look like to take kind of the main principles of Uncle Joe's and translate them outside of WashU. As I was brainstorming what this would look like, I came across an organization here in St. Louis called Unhoused STL. Unhoused STL is a grassroots organization founded on the belief of until. So though they recognize that what unhoused people really need is housing, until they're able to do so, they'll help them with their basic needs, whatever those might be. Now, the beauty of Unhoused is really in its grassroots nature. Many of their volunteers and members have really intimate relationships with being unhoused, whether that's because they've experienced it themselves or because of a family member. These photos here just show some of the many amazing people that make up this community. Now, speaking of their volunteers, this is where I started when I started thinking about my project. Working with their pre-existing volunteer base, I recruited trainees for my program. The hope was to conduct a training for volunteers in kind of basic empathy skills so that they could go on and provide a very basic form of mental health care to our unhoused neighbors. This was really meant to mirror a lot of the work that's done here at WashU with Uncle Joe's. When I first put out kind of the feelers for this program, I was absolutely terrified that no one would sign up, but I was pleasantly surprised. Overnight, I had over 30 people reach out with interest in the program. Now, the real number of trainees was much lower than that, but it was still incredibly validating to see so many people excited about the program. However, along with this excitement also came some pushback. Some members of the community were worried that me as an individual and me as a WashU student didn't have the adequate kind of credentials to take on this role. And I really took that feedback to heart. So over a good portion of my summer, I worked with physicians, counselors, other people here in the community who reached out to make sure that I could really come at this program in an ethical way. So I ended up having 15 volunteers who started and completed my program. And I had a wide range of people. I had a 30-year-old mom who was just doing this out of interest, and I had a 70-year-old individual who was a retired lawyer and actually a recovered alcoholic who spent a lot of his time mentoring people in AA. I'm really grateful for this variety because it added so much dimension to the space and taught me so much. Each week we engaged in conversation. We learned about all sorts of things. We put a big emphasis on mental health and substance use, since those are really big things that affect the unhoused community. And it was really amazing to see the way the trainees were able to absorb and internalize the material. As for what comes next, these trainees are now gonna be placed in winter warming shelters and other community centers where unhoused people frequent, and they'll kind of provide this basic form of mental health care / counseling. And I'm working with Unhoused to create a series of workshops so that people can continue getting this training, and the hope is that the trainees who just trained will become trainers so that this work can continue once I graduate and leave WashU. There's a lot to be done still, but I want to end on the message of hope. There are so many incredible people here in St. Louis who are doing work for the unhoused community and doing really meaningful work. So I think if I've learned anything, I just encourage everyone to take the time to listen to the people around you, people that maybe you don't normally engage with or have conversations with, because there is so much to learn. So, thank you.
Happy birthday. Happy birthday. See, y'all knew I was going to sing. Y'all knew that when y'all gave me the mic. All right, as Stephanie mentioned, Maurice was not able to make it tonight. He is a Margaret Olson and Dr. Joseph Marcus, a Civic Scholar from Palo Alto, California. Maurice explored questions of network and community by creating an online platform for student activists to transfer knowledge, working with community organizations focused on building economic power outside the traditional nonprofit grant model, and by running an educational program with members of several identity-based student activist organizations to foster and inform solidarity by developing strong theoretical foundations. If you want to hear more or see more about Maurice's work, you can go to this site and find out more, and we will be videoing Maurice at a different time to make sure that his information gets shared out there as well. He is not off the hook. I am sorry. All right, so with that, we'll move on. Christian is next. Christian is a Stern Family Civic Scholar from Hawthorne, California. His project led to the creation of a guide for faculty and staff within WashU to better support their disabled students, both in and out of the classroom. So with that, I'll turn it over to Christian.
Thank you, Dwayne.
No problem.
Hey, everyone. Before I get started, I want to lead with a couple of questions for you all to think over. When it comes to disability, what can it look like? How does it feel to have one? Who do you know in your life who identifies as disabled? Taking it on back to me, as a reminder, I'm Christian Alexander, a Stern Family Civic Scholar who, after working on and off with students with disabilities since my freshman year, decided to spend my civic summer making a guide to better support disabled students academically. So, doubling back to whatever you all thought of, disability is that plus so much more. There's incredible diversity of experiences while living in this able-bodied world. For instance, someone who struggles with sight will have completely different experiences than someone who's totally sightless. Similarly, someone who can't hear versus someone whose brain isn't typical will also have different experiences navigating this world as well. So this complexity in understanding disability and supporting it doesn't necessarily translate well into higher education. So in considering how to best support students with disabilities, I decided to start relatively near the top, providing support for faculty and staff and learning more inclusive ways of teaching. So that tends to raise a question: how do I actually reach professors and staff members about this? well, why reinvent the wheel when it's already out there? As you can see, a guide was created previously by the Educational Development Division, EdDev, a part of the Center of Teaching and Learning, and they, in conjunction with the Hab of Health and Wellness Center, made a guide to support student mental health early this year. Icing on the cake, EdDev works directly with teachers to begin with. So, making use of a similar framework, I decided to make a guide for WashU professors and staff members showing more inclusive ways of supporting their students with disabilities. This meant pitching my idea to EdDev and partnering with them, but also partnering with disability resources, the disability experts in ensuring that the ADA is followed and that students are given their accommodations. In addition to these community partnerships, I also wanted to make something that balanced student perspective with what's already proven and supported by the literature in accessible classrooms. So to do that, I partnered with a student group, Ability WashU, so I could distribute some of the work among other passionate students who care for students with disabilities. So, in researching and compiling inclusive teaching practices, Reach Everyone, Teach Everyone provided the backbone of easy, achievable practices for professors. From thought exercises to checklists and diagrams to outlining the role of technology in classes, this book really breaks down how to make a class accessible and why it should be built that way instead of made that way later. But in making something that fits within WashU, it's just as important to hear from students who have lived through navigating the school with a disability. So to that end, I made a Google form asking students for what they want professors to know and offering those interested a chance to provide feedback on the guide as it's being made. Financial compensation, to make sure that we cater to disabled voices. So a lot of this work between partners relies heavily on communication and collaboration. I'd say the biggest lesson I learned was how to communicate effectively to multiple groups. It's necessary to stay humble and be mindful of others' perspectives and point of view, and whether or not that's something worth communicating to Group A or Group B in the first place. So, a lot of the summer was spent getting a large first drafts of sorts finished, like that library on the left, and this semester has been spent condensing that work to make it easier and more approachable for professors, similar to the CTL Hab of Guide shown on the right, published last year. As of right now, I am hoping to email a finished guide to professors and staff before the beginning of the spring 2023 semester. That way, as professors are organizing their syllabi, planning their semesters, getting office hours in order, they can spend roughly an hour or more reading how to make a more inclusive class. That can, in turn, save them dozens of hours throughout the semester. And one of the best parts of making these changes for accessibility and inclusivity, like a dropped exam or having automatic captions over Zoom, is that it gives everyone more options and supports in demonstrating their knowledge, not just students with disabilities who need the support more than others. And in closing, I'd really like to say that this was far from an individual effort. I'm incredibly grateful to be in partnership with Disability Resources and the Center for Teaching and Learning, to work with Ability WashU, to receive some support from the Office of the Provost, from dozens of students with disability who filled out the Google form as mentioned previously, to the Gephardt Institute and the Stern family for funding this project in the first place, to the many people and friends of mine here at WashU who have offered some support, help, feedback in one way or another. In other words, accessible practices truly do mean that you can reach and teach everyone. Thank you.
Great job, Christian. Great job. Wonderful. All right. Next up, Kayla. Kayla is a Sidon Family Civic Scholar from Cleveland, Ohio. For her project, Kayla conducted archival research for the Missouri History Museum's Gateway to Pride initiative aimed at preserving and showcasing the rich, complex, and diverse history of St. Louis's LGBTQ+ community. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, so my name is Kayla, and this is a photo of my mom and I on Halloween of 2010. And now that you've seen this photo, you probably won't be even a little bit surprised to hear that I was dressed as an Ohio State football player, and then 4 years later I came out as gay. Shocker. So I grew up in Solon, Ohio, which is a suburb about 15 miles southeast of Cleveland. And it was a really great place to grow up. We had really well-funded public schools that I attended, and one of my favorite things about Solon was it was really ethnically diverse. About 30% of Solon's population consists of immigrants or first-generation Americans. But for all of its racial and ethnic and religious diversity, Solon was not very diverse in gender identity or sexual orientation, which is in line with findings across the rest of the Midwest. Growing up queer in the Midwest, you really don't have a lot of representation, and I was really looking for that when I came to college. I was looking to see if that existed outside of the New Yorks and the San Franciscos of the world. Before I got here, really all I knew about queer experience or queer history was limited to Stonewall. This is the only known photo taken from night one of the Stonewall riots. But Greenwich Village in New York City seemed really, really far away from Ohio and really, really far away from Missouri, and 1969 felt like a really long time ago. So I partnered for my civic summer with the Missouri History Museum, the Missouri Historical Society, and worked on their Gateway to Pride initiative. For the Gateway to Pride initiative, I sort of acted like a mini curator of sorts. I would go into libraries at the State Historical Society of Missouri, at the University of Missouri St. Louis, or at WashU's libraries in the Olin Special Collections, and I would make appointments, call them, tell them which boxes I was interested in looking through, and then once I would look through those boxes every day, I would read for hours. I would record notes on my laptop in my physical notebook. I would take scans of anything that I thought might be a useful artifact or piece of contextual information for the museum. And then I would send that along. So while I was in WashU Special Collections on the left, I spent most of my time working with the Laura Ann Moore papers. Laura Ann Moore was a really prominent lesbian feminist activist in St. Louis. Her collection spanned roughly the 1960s to the 1990s. And while she did a lot of really interesting queer activism, I was personally really interested in the fact that she also did a lot of racial activism, housing activism, AIDS-related activism. And the emphasis that she placed on intersectionality I found really interesting. Specifically, she worked with this women's car repair collective, which operated on a sliding scale and sought to provide honest and affordable auto repair services to and for women. This really struck me as an early form of radical mutual aid, and I was super hooked. And then when I got to the State Historical Society of Missouri, I read through the Barbara McGough papers. You don't need to read this. This is a letter she wrote her senator, and you probably can't read it anyways. But your takeaway about Barbara should be that she did everything. She was involved in everything, just like Laura, and she saved everything, which was super useful for me, obviously. And I was just really interested in the work that she did. I saw the same commitment to honesty, transparency, and intersectionality in her work that I saw in Laura's. This is a holiday flyer that I found in Barbara's papers from St. Louis Acts Out, which was a prominent activist organization at the time. And this struck me as a form of care and love expressed by queer St. Louisans to queer St. Louisans at a time when I didn't realize that those connections even existed in the first place. This is from Laura's papers. This is a collection or a list of different lesbian-focused gatherings and groups. And I wouldn't know where to find something like this in 2022. So I was shocked to see that this existed in 1978. And not only did it exist, but it existed right here in St. Louis in the Midwest. It was the kind of representation that I had never seen before. These are some of the artifacts, just some, of the memorabilia that I found in Barbara's papers. Like I said, she kept everything. And this was the most exposure I had ever had to the queer experience and queer history, and it came from St. Louis. I realized that this network that I had uncovered of queer activism has existed for a really long time, even when I didn't realize it. And I don't think that the importance of these community networks can really be understated. I think that the work that Laura was doing, the work that Barbara was doing, and the work that all of these other activists were doing showcases that this really rich and complex and diverse history of queer experience in St. Louis has always existed, and it still exists now, and you just have to know where to find it. So when you think of queer St. Louis, you might be like me, you might see the right, you may think of Rehab, and you might think of Pride Fest, but I also want you to think of Dante's Inferno, which was Rehab before Rehab, and a real Pride Parade, because we don't really have those anymore. This one's from 1981. This experience has always existed, and learning about it can really clarify so much about your own identity, I promise. So, little call to action. The in-person component of the exhibit is opening in the first quarter of 2024 to celebrate 10 years of marriage equality, and I highly urge you, if you're in St. Louis, to check it out. I think that you'll find there's something for everyone, whether you're queer or not, and I hope that you keep in mind that queer history has existed everywhere, and St. Louis history and Missouri history are maybe a little bit more queer than you would expect.
Wonderful job, great job. All right, I invite our last three up. Get your questions ready. Get your questions ready.
So once again, super amazing job, all of you guys. So I guess for Kayla, I was wondering, so you said that like you would have trouble finding a sort of similar network. For those in the community who like aren't perhaps looking, how would they be like informed about like the community in St. Louis? And I guess like, do you think there's any reason why it seemed more connected back then than it is now?
Yeah, I don't know if I would say that it was more connected back then than it is now. I mean, I think that if I probably put more effort into seeking out a community like this right now, I would probably find it just as easily as I found the one that I uncovered over the summer. I think that if you're really seeking out the sort of community like that, I think that, well, one, I think it's easier now than it was then. I think that more people like myself are out and just talk to people, I think, number one. Ask people where they're going and who they're talking to and meeting people that way. But I mean, go to the museum, like go to the exhibit when it opens. There's an online component open right now. And I think that, you know, I think that it's easy to find if you're willing to put in the effort. And I think that if you're not really interested to put in the effort, I would urge, you know, young queer people to do the sort of research that I did on a much smaller scale. Don't go into the archives, but go to the museum website and see what they have to say. And I think it might spark interest enough to sort of seek out those connections further.
More questions? Don't be shy, it's okay. More? Any? Oh, we got one in the... I knew you had a question. I knew you did.
Hey, y'all. I was just wondering if y'all could explain y'all whys. I feel like we've seen a lot of presentations today that are linked to a lot of different like passions and things like that, and I feel like that passion and that thought is very important, especially in projects like this. And so if you can just explain like your why. Some of you did that already in your presentations, but just giving like a brief synopsis of like that why, especially as it relates to your experience of being here at WashU.
I can go first. I think I touched on this a little bit. Sorry, not to make you listen to me talk back to back to back. I think I talked about this a little bit, but I think right now in the current political climate, it can be really easy for young queer people in the Midwest or in red states like Ohio or like Missouri to flee to areas that are, you know, liberal and more on paper welcoming. But I love where I'm from and I love where I am now, and I wanted a reason to stay and I found it.
Yeah, so little background about my experiences. I've been working on and off with a student who is visually impaired for roughly 2 or so years now, and I've never seen personally, but as a secondhand witness, you know, transcribing emails or helping to plan this or that, like I've witnessed the sheer amount of like barriers that they've had to go through within WashU, whether it be with professors or with disability resources or just in trying to find what, if any, other visually impaired students there are. And so after seeing just like all of that, you know, like work that they have to do that I cannot relate to at all whatsoever, I wanted to make something that, like, you know, could at least start to make a process easier for like future students, whether they're visually impaired or anything else, really.
Yeah, I think I have a two-part answer. The first part in terms of why mental health and where that interest kind of came from and sparked. When I was entering high school, I had a close friend of mine tell me that they were kind of experiencing suicidality, and that was my first real experience with mental health, and I had no idea how to react, and they're fine and they've gotten the help that they needed, but I think that was a friendship that I lost because I reacted really poorly because I didn't know what to do, and so I dedicated the next how many ever years to making sure that that would never happen again, and I just got interested on the advocacy side, and then now since coming to WashU, being on that like counseling side of things has been really meaningful. And then in terms of like why working with the unhoused, I feel like a lot of times when it comes to big societal level issues, you kind of get overwhelmed with where to start, and a lot of people might check out before they even try. or feel like the work that they're going to do is not going to be impactful because there's so many other issues at play. And I think for me, seeing that like starting small, having a conversation with someone, adding meaning to their day-to-day, that can go a really long way, and I wanted a way to translate that into this work, and it just felt right. So, yeah.
All right, any questions? More? All right, let's give them. Oh, we have one.
I love Barry. Honestly. Barry's the glue that holds the Civic
Yes,
Scholars
sorry.
program together, just so everybody knows.
Quite frankly.
No, I was really shocked. Well, I wasn't really surprised, but especially for Ruchika, like the emails about pushback that you got from entering the community. So I was wondering, like, how did you sort of like, what was the process like, sort of dealing with that pushback? And did any of you guys also feel pushback from yourselves or from external external community members about entering this? Because I feel like all of you guys covered relatively delicate like fields and interests. So what was that process like entering that community, and I guess for you facing that pushback, and how did you feel?
Yeah, I guess I'll start. But I'll say one thing during training for Uncle Joe's is you get a lot of criticism and a lot of feedback. And so you learn pretty early, you know, the stakes are high, so you learn pretty early like how to take that feedback in, which is really good. But I think in this context, it was really scary because I know in Civic we've talked a lot about like making sure you enter communities ethically and that the communities you're entering need you there and want you there. And I at first saw this and was like, oh, I can't swear on here. I was like, oh no, like I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing. And so had to take a moment, had to take a pause, but then when I really got the chance to speak to the community members who were worried, it was just really a great way to like start a relationship and form a connection, and their concerns were very valid, and we just found a way to kind of help each other, and now hopefully this will be something that's more consistent, which I think is really cool. But I think that helped like build trust from the beginning that we were both wanting to work together.
I think the biggest like indirect pushback you could argue, I guess, is like sometimes you write something that like you think is like hidden on something, like you think you digging into something good, like your point of view perspective like wrote that, but it did not resonate the same way it did with you with group A or group B or group C. And it really, I mean, in worst case scenario, it's about taking accountability for that and being like, oh, I am so sorry for this. Ooh, like I thought I was getting here, but it went all the way over there. And I had to like come correct and, you know, take accountability, understand what led to that, and prioritize what's important. You know, what's more important, staying on this hill and dying on it, or trying to get a guide out that will actually support students, support faculty. Just weighing a balancing act of things out.
I don't think okay. I don't feel like I feel like I was lucky. I don't think I experienced a ton of pushback in entering the community. I think just by virtue of being a member of the queer community, I think I was welcomed in for the most part with open arms. I mean, I had a little bit of time solidifying my specific partnership. If anything, it's wrong in a number of ways and maybe a little bit funny to call like the queer St. Louis scene like a boys club, but it did feel like that for a little bit. I think just in the sense that like it was a little bit, the people who were doing this work had been doing it for a long time, and there were only a few of them and they knew each other really well. So sort of being able to jump in and prove that I deserved to be there was a little bit difficult at first, but I mean overall, yeah, I don't have much to complain about.
All right, let's give them and everyone a round of applause. No problem, it's all good, got it. All right, I won't keep you too much longer, but as you heard tonight, and if you were able to join us yesterday, you heard about our Civic Scholars focusing on heavy, deep, major issues. I mean, major, deep, tough issues that can be scary, that can be intimidating, but they did it. And they did it by going in and looking at small bits of how do you basically start moving forward. How do you go in and start increasing access, collaborating, unpacking, supporting, working with, exploring, doing some creation, and conducting the research? It's all those actionable steps. So we heard great presentations yesterday. We heard great presentations tonight. But we need to do the work to continue the movement, continue the momentum, and ensure that all of this greatness and all of this excellence does not stop right now, but we continue to face these civic issues, these community issues that continue to affect all of St. Louis, the entire nation as well. So, great evening. Thank you for coming out. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for supporting these amazing individuals. And let's do credit to them by continuing to go out and do the work after today. All right, so with that, thank you very much.